Okay, now, the Diamond Sun 12-strand DNA matrix. People who have been in the workshops before understand that I've talked about the original human imprint being a 12, not a 2-strand DNA pattern. This was the original design. There is an original design, which means somebody designed it, the DNA imprint for the human form. What we have right now are 3 active strands. That's all. We get 3-dimensional consciousness because we have 3 strands activated, which allows only 3 dimensions of frequency, scalar wave patterns, to translate through the hologram into manifestation. Originally, we were supposed to have 12 strands. Now, the strands don't look like this. This is a diagram that I use to show relationships of strands to each other. And to show you, there's other diagrams that in other courses on the DNA that I get more into, I show you what's contained, the basic codes contained in each strand. So this is a diagram. This is not how, if you look real close down into your morph structure, it's going to look like that. There are geometrical relationships of these scalar wave grids that have very specific, what they call geomancies, or angles of interrelationship. This is not those. This is simply a way to show you strand content, strand amount, so you can compare what yours was supposed to be when you were originally designed as being a human consciousness, what it is now, what it needs to grow back into being, so you can reclaim your ascension codes, which are your appropriate fire letter sequences that correspond directly to the dimensional bands. This is what our evolution is about here, even without the indigos. This is what we have been trying to accomplish all along down here on planet Earth, was to try to rebuild our original imprint because it was shattered at one point. It's a morphogenetic field that had 12 primary fire letter sequences, flashing on and off sequences. Some of those frequencies were completely pulled out. The flash line sequences just didn't exist anymore, which threw off the whole calibration of how consciousness related to itself. This is DNA mutation. Mutation of fire letters, distortion of fire letters, distortion of scalar wave patterns, translates into DNA mutation, translates into perceptual distortion. We have been living for 200,000 years under perceptual distortion caused by DNA mutation. We have been trying to re-evolve back into the 12-strand DNA pattern, which means each one of these strands, each line here represents a strand. That represents a flash line sequence, a fire letter sequence, that corresponds to one dimension, that corresponds to one dimension of your consciousness. 12 strands implied 12 dimensions of consciousness embodied in a human form, which is an avatar identity that's capable of moving its vibrational rate where it wants to, appearing and disappearing at will, and manifesting in 4 harmonics of matter density wherever it chooses. That was our original potential. We have the ability to reverse mutate that, and I've done workshops on that, and that's what our programs are about. I have the tangible structure of the soul program here, which is the beginning. Cathara healing is the 2nd level. We're learning to reverse mutate the mess that our DNA is turned into. If we realize our consciousness that we use to, if we think a thought, we are making a waveform. If we hold an image in our mind, we're not just imagining things, as psychology would love to try to get us to believe. We are creators created in the image of the original creator, which simply would think, and thinking, by the process of thinking and cognating, would create many morphogenetic fields within itself. We do this. Every time we think a thought, we're creating a thing in scalar form. We're creating a template that something will manifest upon. If we begin to understand this, and we begin to understand, too, that our DNA is what? It's a scalar pattern. They're the same substance. Waves affect waves. The scalar patterns we put here and direct into the DNA will affect the DNA. You can reverse mutate. You don't need scientists and laboratories and fancy equipment to do this. All you need is to know how to use the equipment you came in with, your mind-body-spirit system. And this is what we teach, how to begin the process of repairing this DNA so we can get our higher levels of consciousness back. So all this stuff they talk about that seems so far out to many people becomes common knowledge, because on your higher dimensional levels of identity, you already know this. You don't need me to teach you there because you already remember. Here we just forgot because the DNA code blocked it. So we're in a process of remembering, not creating something that doesn't exist. We're just remembering what was always ours, which was the 12-strand heritage. It's important to realize this heritage because if we want to understand indigos, we're going to be able to start seeing, with understanding this heritage, how they differ from the basic human imprint in a good way. But it's kind of mind-blowing. If you consider right now, we're working on 3 strands of activation. We're actually, I think, what's the next one there? I want to show the root race chart. That's a ways up, huh? There we go. Okay. Now, we're aiming for, our evolutionary objective is the 12-strand pattern. Okay? We're on 3-strand right now. This is the overall pattern that we have been involved with for many millennia. The 12 tribes and the Earth's seedings. We're a part of a huge, huge, long-term evolutionary experiment that has been ongoing for many, many thousands of years. This is the 3rd time this race, our race, was seeded on this planet. It got wiped out the other 2 times. And that some of that history is in the Amente, Voyages of Mente book. Much more of it is coming in the new books, if I ever get time to write them, because more of it, I have been accessing more. But we need to understand something. There's a pattern in a design that's absolutely beautiful to the evolution of a race. Imagine you're a very high being up there beyond matter density. You're going to create a race. You're a creator God. Not the big God, but a smaller God. We're all faces of God. We all have creative ability. So you're going to create a race of beings. This beautifully designed, eloquent plan was created by which we'd have 12 tribes, 7 root races, and 5 cloister races. The root races would be a period of time on the planet where one type of being that had one of the strands, one of the flash line sequences, moving the consciousness through this certain time period would create evolution of one DNA strand. That's what each root race did. And to get here, it implies you have incarnations in the earlier root races, or you wouldn't have 3 strands. The way you got to be a 3-strand being was to have evolved first through the earlier root races, which are Polarians and Hibernians. They are actually an etheric matter race that started on harmonic 3 of Earth, which is called Gaia. The physical root races started to come in down through here with the Lumians. All right. They were evolving strand 2. In our seeding, these already got wiped out. We're back up here. They reseeded them again. These 2 were all right. They reseeded from number 3, root race 3, Lemurians. They were working on evolving strand 2. So everybody in this room and everybody on the planet, to be here in a strand 3 body implies you have Lemurian incarnations in your cellular memory that gave you the flash line sequences and fire letter sequences. Associate it with that time period. Associate it with strand 2. Associate it with the 2nd dimensional frequency bands. Okay? These were here 73,000 years ago. That's when they got seeded here. Now, with each root race, there was a cloister race that came in with the purpose of 2 things. First, the cloister race would come in first and birth through the root race potential. The cloister race was a bigger flashline sequence DNA. It had more strands. And out of that, smaller versions would come to evolve the particular strands of the lower parts. So each root race had a cloister race affiliation. 75,000 years ago, the first race to come in physical were called the Urantrians. They had in their flashline sequence of birth strand 2 plus 7 through 12. Now notice with all the cloister races, they have whatever the single strand is that their root race went with, but they also have strand 7 through 12. They held the potential of the 12-strand pattern, anchored it here into the race morph field, so it would be a potential for the races. Because if they just came in with one strand, they would have stayed one strand. You needed to have a race that would hold these higher potentials while the lower potentials were evolved and the strands were built up to meet them. The process and design of our evolution is literally passing through these thousands and thousands of years of root and cloister race cycles to progressively and very slowly rebuild the flashline sequences of our 12-strand DNA pattern. It didn't have to be that slow, but it was an agreement made by stellar races that would be stretched out over many thousands of years. Because the last time we were up there, this race, we got a little full of ourselves and created some real messes. So there are beings in the higher harmonics that don't want to hear anything about giving humans the key to the kingdom again. Not anytime soon. They want to make sure when we evolve down here, we get it this time, and we learn compassion, and we learn to use our power with wisdom, because we almost blew a planet up. when our race was in the higher harmonics. That's how we got down here in the first place. So there's a lot of politics going on in the higher harmonics with the beings who reside there as far as how much humans are going to be allowed to know. When it was finally agreed that they'd even let us re-evolve to get our consciousness back out of being stuck down in this harmonic in fragmented form, they agreed to allow the Mente rescue mission to take place. We fragmented from harmonic 2. The consciousness of the race that was the human race there. Fragmented. Literally, its morphogenetic field blew apart, and little fragments of consciousness just blended in with the dimensional frequency bands down here. And they would have stayed as undifferentiated units of consciousness if the original imprint of their morphogenetic template was not re-entered down here so they could start to build back up into it. It was building our consciousness back up in this harmonic to get back to what we were before we blew ourselves apart. It's hard to understand from our scientific perspective that doesn't even like to acknowledge anything above D3. But it was a very grand evolutionary plan of races over long periods of time to give us back our original potential. At this point, we are here. And when I speak about Aryan race, every one of the root races has all of the colors. Okay, so Aryans are not just white. You know, there are black Aryans, there are red-skinned Aryans. They're basically red, white, black, brown, and yellow were the basic skin categorizations, and there's all sorts of combinations of all of those. So each one of the root races had a predominant cloister race that had a predominant one of those colors, but then they would have all of the other colors in each race. So every race color was represented equally in all of the root and cloister races. Now, we've managed to evolve through our Lemurian period. The next one was to evolve strand number 3 in the fourth root race cycle. That began with the Branoa cloister. Now, I was a member of this. I had an incarnation in that period, a couple of them in that period, so I remember certain things from that period. Last time they were here was 72,000 years ago. Before that, before they got wiped out the first time, they were here 3 million years ago. These are ancient, ancient races we're talking about here. Okay? Before that, I believe they came in, no, we didn't get that, yeah, we got that far, 12 million years ago. So when we talk about the Branoa race, which are actually related more closely than any of the other cloisters except the Melchizedeks to the Indigos, we're talking about ancient, ancient races of beings here. There's an ancient genetic imprint. So right now, we've managed to get to the point where we're of the Aryan fifth root race cycle. Most of the people on the planet, and probably few of the people in this room, are of the Aryan root race. Evolving strand 4, just coming into opening up fourth dimensional frequencies into your awareness, just beginning to acknowledge the astral level of existence, just beginning to have perceptions associated with fourth dimensional consciousness. That's where most people are at in our present times. Most people in this room are probably more so in through here or here, where you're working on fourth through fifth strand development, because the information that I'm carrying comes in on a minimum of fifth dimensional frequency at this point. People who can't hold fifth dimensional frequency in their consciousness, they don't have the flashline sequence receptors for it, will not be drawn to this information. They can't process it. They won't be able to grasp it, and that's okay. So the people who are drawn here, sitting in these rooms, learning this stuff, it implies that you have a gene code that has some of the higher strand content to some degree, because that's drawing you in to receive information that's coming in on these frequencies. But most of us, most of the people on the planet walking around out there in Sleepersville, are of the area